Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Today, inshallah, we shall talk about plant cell and tissues and plant as a living organism. As you recall, an organism can be studied at different levels. At the most basic levels, we're all made of cells, but there are many different types of cells. For example, there are cardiac muscle cells, there are neurons in the brain, there are fat cells that store fat, etc., etc. So there are many different types of cells. When different types of cells get together, they make a tissue. And when different types of tissues get together, they can make an organ. The heart, for example. The heart is made of different types of tissue. It has heart muscle tissue. It also has nerves tissue, neurons that stimulate the heart and keep it beating constantly. And heart is only one part of a bigger system, the cardiovascular system. And many different types of systems, such as the pulmonary system, the lung system, the nervous system, the gastrointestinal system, along with the cardiovascular system. When all of these systems are combined together, they make up an organism. So the structure of a living thing can be organized or analyzed at a cellular level, then at a tissue level, then at an organ level, then at an organ system level, and at an organism level. The same goes for plants. So we can study plants at a cellular level, then at a tissue level, then at an organ level, such as a leaf, then at an organ system level, such as the vascular system in the plants, and then plant as a whole organism. So we shall begin our study of plants today with cells. As you recall, plant cells have some special features. Distinguishing features of a plant cell are its cell wall, the chloroplast, and of course, the vacuole. So these three important features of plants, the cell wall, the chloroplast, and the central vacuole, are very peculiar to plants, and they are not found in animal cells. There are other aspects of cells that we have talked about before. For example, we have talked about the plasmodesmata, these tunnels that allow communication between cells in plants. The central vacuole of note is of particular importance. It's what gives plants the turgidity, the strength. When a plant is dehydrated, it wilts. That's primarily because central vacuoles of the cells in the plants don't have water. So when you water the plants and plants become strong again and well hydrated, it is because all that water is nourishing the plant and the central vacuole is expanding. Although there are many different types of plants, what you see before you is a basic understanding of a typical plant. Anything above ground is called the shoot, and anything below ground is called the root of the plant. And some important anatomical parts of the plants are the flower, the leaf buds, the stem. And the root can be broadly classified as the primary root and its numerous divisions, the lateral roots. Now, the flower, of course, is a thing of beauty, but from a biologist's point of view, a flower is a plant organ. Its job is, in fact, to produce seeds. Leaf also, in fact, is another organ of a plant. It's the photosynthetic organ, one of the most important organs of the plant. Going back to plant cell types, broadly speaking, we can divide plant cell types into three types. The first are the parenchymal cells. These are the predominant cells in a plant. And then there are the collenchymal cells. And finally, there are the sclerenchymal cells. So parenchymal cells, or some people call it parenchymal cells, collenchymal cells, and sclerenchymal cells. Now, parenchymal cells are some of the most numerous cells in the plant. These are the cells that dominate in the leaves, the stems, etc. They are thin-walled and can be found throughout the plant, and they retain their ability to divide. They can have lots of chloroplast, and you can have parenchymal cells that don't have as many chloroplasts. The parenchymal cells of leaves, for example, would be studded with chloroplasts. The second type of cells are the collenchymal cells. These are cells that are designed to support the plant. As the plant grows, of course, it has to withstand wind and weather, etc. So it has to have a certain degree of strength. So collenchymal cells help in that. They have unevenly thickened cell walls. In other words, their cell walls are thicker, and thus they provide support and flexibility to the plant. They also help in repair of tissue and replacement of tissue when it gets damaged. For example, you wonder how when you cut the grass grows back. That's because there's repair and regeneration of the grass after every lawn mowing session. In this picture to the right, you can see the parenchymal cells, and they're greener, so to speak, and the collenchymal cells with a thicker cell wall. In this case, they're stained there to highlight the stain of the cell wall. The third type of cell, of course, is the sclerenchymal cells. These are the sturdiest cells. They have very rigid, thick cell walls, and the cells themselves are dead. There are two types of these cells, fibrous and sclerids, and they're important aspects of the vascular system of plants. So, the job of the sclerenchymal cells is to provide support, and they're straws that help transport waters and minerals across the plant. So these are three main types of cells. The parenchymal cells, they're like the worker bee cells of the plant, so to speak, the collenchymal cells, and the sclerenchymal cells. Now, if you look at them over here, one of the key distinguishing features is the thickness of the cell wall, as you can see. In regards to tissue, there are three major types of tissues, and that's reasonable to understand over here, because tissues that have predominantly parenchymal cells, they're called parenchymal tissue, and tissues that have predominantly collenchymal cells are called collenchymal tissue, and tissue that have predominantly sclerenchymal cells are called sclerenchymal tissue. That's easy enough. Plant tissues can also be divided into two different parts. Generally speaking, plant tissue can be divided into growing or dividing type of tissue and permanent tissue that does not divide. So again, tissues in plant can be divided into two types, growing, dividing tissue, and this type of tissue is called meristematic tissue. Let me repeat that again. Meristematic tissue. And then there's the permanent tissue or tissue that does not divide. Now, in regards to meristematic or growing tissue, that's where the growth of plant occurs. Plant growth occurs in three different directions, so to speak. The plant grows taller, the plant grows wider, and the plant grows deeper. Let me repeat myself. Plant growth occurs in three different directions. Plant grows taller, plant grows wider, and plant grows deeper. The growth of plant occurs at the very top of the plant. That's called the terminal bud. In other words, let's say you come in one day, and then you put a little post-it over here on the plant, and you come back 1 year later. You will notice, even if the plant had grown 10 times taller, the post-it would be right there. It would not have budged, because that part of the plant does not contribute to the height of the plant. So it is the terminal bud that contributes to the height of the plant. Now, the terminal bud has what's called apical meristem, or meristematic tissue at the apex or the height of the plant. Now, it's intuitive that the plant can just keep growing taller and taller and taller, because then it will be very tall and very skinny and it'll just fall all over, right? So as the plant grows taller, it also has to grow wider. And that grows, or the lateral growth, occurs in the stem. But not all cells of the plant contribute to the growth of plant. And there's some specialized cells called the meristematic cells that contribute to plant growth. The cells that divide that contribute to the girth or the width of the plant, that tissue is called the lateral meristem. You must understand, this tissue goes all the way up and down the plant. In other words, the entire stem is clothed with this lateral meristem. And finally, as I have suggested, plant grows deeper. As the plant grows taller, it must necessarily grow more roots for support and also for obtaining the nutrients that are needed for plant growth. The growth of the roots occurs at the root cap, at the very tips of the root, which is specialized to protect them against the violence, so to speak, of growing deeper into sand and rock. Thus, in summary, it is the apical meristem that contributes to the height of the plant. The lateral meristem contributes to the width or the girth of the plant. There's another type of meristem, or growing tissue, that's called the intercalary tissue, or intercalary meristem, and that gives rise to lateral buds, or shoots that go sideways, exits, so to speak, from the main stem. Here's the root cap, which is specialized tissue at the very tip of the roots that help protect the root as it grows. In summary, plant tissues can be divided into those that allow plant to grow. This is the meristematic tissue, and permanent tissue, plant tissue that do not grow. In meristematic tissue, we have the apical meristematic tissue, the lateral meristematic tissue, and the intercalary meristematic tissue, which is not shown in this diagram. And finally, plant growth occurs also in the roots. And the permanent tissues of the plant can be subdivided into two. There's a simple permanent tissue. This includes the parenchymal, collenchymal, and the sclerenchymal cells, which we've just talked about. And then there is the complex permanent tissue. These are the phloem and the xylem. Now, this doesn't mean that the parenchymal and the collenchymal cells cannot divide. But once they're formed, they typically don't divide. And also, as you will see, the complex permanent tissue, the phloem and the xylem, once they are formed, they don't divide. But as the plant grows, new phloem and xylem necessarily must be formed. Now, as we've studied before, complex permanent tissue are the components of the vascular system. The xylem that takes water and minerals from the ground to different parts of the plant, and the phloem that takes sugars, etc., to different parts of the plant. So if you take a cross-section of a stem over here, you may see the vascular tissue arranged in this manner in vascular bundles. As we have studied before, the vascular bundles are arranged differently in a dicot versus a monocot stem. In a dicot stem, they're very organized in their arrangement, whereas in a monocot stem, they seem to be more haphazard. And sometimes their arrangement seems to make no sense. Now, if you look at a dicot stem, we appreciate the following. We note that on the very outside, there's the epidermis. This term is the same term that we use for our skin. Below the epidermis is the cortex. Cortex meaning the very outside of the stem. The cortex contains collenchymal cells on the very outside because they provide strength and flexibility to the plant. And under the collenchymal cells are the parenchymal cells, the meat of the plant, so to speak. The very center of the plant is called the pith. And of course, we see the vascular bundles arranged in this manner. The vascular bundles, as you recall, contain the xylem and the phloem elements, and they're frequently surrounded by a bundle sheet that protects them. Between the xylem and the phloem elements in the vascular bundle is the vascular cambium. Now, this is meristematic tissue. So when we're talking about meristematic tissue that gives width or girth to the plant as the plant grows wider, it is the vascular cambium that produces new xylem and phloem to allow this plant to grow. The vascular bundle is arranged in a ring, and it's not a big stretch of imagination that next year it'll be another ring of vascular tissue, the following year another ring of vascular tissue, and the following year another ring of vascular tissue in this plant. And that indeed is the source of the rings that we see in plants. So within the vascular bundle, you see of course the xylem and the phloem elements, and between them, as you recall, is the cambium, which is the meristematic or the embryonic cell that is able to differentiate into either phloem or xylem elements. It is this tissue, the meristematic tissue of the plant, that allows for growth of the plant in its width, in its diameter. Now we shall focus briefly on the roots of plants. If you take a cross-section of a root, it might look like this. Just like human skin, plant has epidermis, that is the outer skin of the plant. There's also an endodermis layer, the layer that's colored green in this picture. Plants have an epidermal layer, or the epidermis, and they have an endodermal layer, or endodermis. Between the epidermis and the endodermis is the cortex, and below these layers is the vascular cylinder, or the vascular bundle. One interesting aspect of the epidermis, or the epidermis cells, is the hair root. Hair roots are tiny projections of cells of the epidermis that increase the surface area for absorption of water and minerals in the root. Now, here's another cross-section of the root. Again, we see the epidermis, the cortex layer, and then below the cortex layer will be here the endodermis layer, and inside, the very middle of it, is the vascular bundle. Now, absorption of water and minerals occurs in two different ways. Again, absorption of water and minerals occurs in two different ways, or two different routes. In other words, water has two different pathways of getting from the outside of the plant into the vascular tissue. One route is called the apoplastic route, and the second route is called the symplastic route. Apoplastic route is movement of water and minerals between the cells of the cortex. Again, the apoplastic route is the movement of water and minerals between the cells of the cortex. The symplastic route is movement of water and minerals through the cells of the cortex, like this. Now, both of these routes deliver the water and minerals to vascular tissue. However, there is a toll booth, so to speak. Regardless of how water and minerals enter the root, they all must come to the endodermis, which is magnified over here. Now, endodermis is very interesting in that all the routes outside of the cells are closed shut. Now, endodermis has a strip called the Caspian Strip. Now, Caspian Strip basically is like cement around this endodermis cells. So water and minerals in the endodermis cannot go around those cells. It must go necessarily through those cells. So even though water and minerals come into the plant root either via the apoplastic or the symplastic route, but when they get to the endodermis, they must necessarily go through the cells because there's nowhere around the cells because of this Caspian strip. Now this is important because this is the way plant can regulate what comes in and out. Now there are different types of roots. The three most common types of roots are the tap root, where there's one big long major root and a few side branches. For example, the dandelion. Pull up a dandelion from the ground, you'd see something like this. Now, I don't know what your experience has been, but I've noticed it's much harder to pull up grass because grass roots are different. They have fibrous root system. Their root system is enmeshed in the ground. Therefore, they're typically harder to pull out. And the third important type of root system is called adventitious root system. For example, corn has this system, where there's some extra roots to anchor the plant and give more stability. So the three common types of root systems are the tap root system, the fibrous root system, and the adventitious root system. And then there's some special modifications of roots. Carrots, radishes, and turnips, for example, are basically roots that are modified to store extra food. And some roots are specialized to store water. Some adventitious roots can be pretty impressive, like you see over here. Adventitious roots basically are roots that come from the stem of the plant and they fall to the ground and then they go dig themselves into the ground, like you see over here, for support. This is a fascinating root system. These are pneumatophores. Now, pneumatophores are roots that kind of come out of the ground and they aid in absorption of oxygen from the air. Finally, we shall finish today by talking about the structure of the leaf. The leaf veins that you see before here are the vascular tissue of the plant. They're the xylem and phloem going to and fro to all different parts of the leaf. There are different types of leaves. Leaves can be characterized based on the type of vein structures that they have. They may have a net-like vein or like parallel veins like this. Leaves can also be classified based on their shapes or their arrangements. A simple leaf or compound leaf, a leaf that's composed of multiple other tiny leaves, is another example of a compound leaf. And leaves can also be classified according to their edges, whether they have smooth edges, toothed edges, or lobed edges, and how they're arranged in the stem. They could be arranged in alternate fashion, like over here. They could be arranged in opposite sides, or in a whorled appearance like this. If you take a cross-section of a leaf, you'll see the following. If you recall, plants and leaves have special adaptation in that they have a layer of cuticle or waxy material covering them. This cuticle is very beneficial in that it prevents evaporation of water and dehydration and for plants. Under the cuticle, you'll see the epidermal layer. Now, a leaf has two sides. So the epidermis is classified as the upper epidermis and the lower epidermis. Now, leaves capture more sunlight, of course, from the top side. Therefore, more photosynthesis occurs on the top side of the leaves. And hence, the mesophyll cells, or the major cells of the leaves that do all the photosynthesis, are divided into two types. There's the Palisade Mesophyll and the spongy mesophyll. Palisade mesophyll, meaning they're all lined up like in a stack, do most of the photosynthesis in a leaf. They have lots of chloroplast. This is the reason why the leaf is typically more greener on the top side than on the bottom side. So both the Palisade and the spongy mesophyll cells are able to do photosynthesis. It's just the Palisade mesophylls are more efficient. Of course, leaves will have highways of the vascular bundles coursing through them, supplying all these cells with the minerals and water that they need to carry on the photosynthesis. Leaves also have a lot of air space in them. In other words, there's just a lot of empty space in between these cells. This is why leaves float. Some leaves, in fact, have much more air spaces in them, specially designed to kind of float on water, such as the water lily. Now, you must understand the following. This cuticle layer, although it's cute and beautiful and protects the leaves and plants from getting dehydrated, etc., also does something else. It prevents gas exchange. Now, you know plant cells need water and carbon dioxide to do all that photosynthesis that they do. Where do they get it from? Well, they're not going to be able to get it from the top because of the cuticle. Cuticle prevents that. It's a waxy layer that prevents water from going either way, going into or outside the plant. So gas and water exchange is prohibited by the cuticle. So where does it all come from? Well, I introduce you to the guard cells and the stoma. Now, stoma can occur on either side of leaves, but they're predominantly on the underside of the leaves. Stoma refers to a little hole created by these guard cells. So there are these two guard cells that can open and close, allowing gas and water exchange to occur. So the carbon dioxide that the plant needs enter the leaves through the stoma, and the oxygen that they produce that we love exits the leaves from the stoma. And the water these cells need come from xylem and phloem from the ground. As you recall, stoma are also very important in this process of transpiration. It is in the stoma that carbon dioxide enters the leaves, and it is from the stoma that the oxygen exits. This is a scanning electron micrograph of guard cells, and this, of course, is a light microscope picture. So, when the guard cells are flaccid, the stoma is closed. And when they gain water, the cells expand, they swell, and like a sausage, they open up. Well, that's our brief survey of plant anatomy. I hope you enjoyed. Until next time, as-salatu was-salamu ala rasulillah walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Assalamu alaikum.